The rain had a way of telling secrets that night, soft, steady, and strangely insistent, as though the storm itself knew what was about to unfold inside the Hartford mansion. Most people in the city believed nothing unexpected ever happened behind those towering iron gates. But if they could have seen the flicker in Adana's tired eyes or the shadow of defeat in Daniel Hartford's posture, they would have known this night was different. Something was breaking, quietly, gently, like the first crack in a long frozen river. Before we continue, if you love true stories that inspire, make sure you subscribe. You don't want to miss what happens here. Adana moved the dim hallway, holding a tray of folded linens. Each step a reminder of how heavy her body felt after a 14-hour shift. The mansion was a world of marble floors and golden fixtures, but none of that mattered when your hands were calloused and your spirit worn thin. She had learned to work silently, to take commands without complaint, and to survive each day by staying invisible. Tonight, though, invisibility felt impossible. Exhaustion clung to her like a second skin. At the far end of the corridor, the study door stood slightly open, glowing with a warm light that spilled across the carpet like a path she wished she could avoid. She hesitated. Daniel Hartford was still awake. Of course he was. Billionaires didn't sleep, not when empires demanded constant attention. But Adana wasn't afraid of his wealth. She was afraid of his reputation. The staff whispered about his temper, his impatience, the icy silence he used as punishment. She had felt that coldness once before, and the memory of it still tightened her chest. Still, duty pulled her forward. Inside the study, Daniel sat hunched over a mountain of documents. His shoulders were drawn tight, and the glow from the desk lamp made the dark circles under his eyes appear deeper. He looked like a man battling more than just numbers, perhaps ghosts, regrets, or a life that demanded too much. He didn't notice her at first, and for a fleeting moment, she wondered what it might feel like if he never looked up at all. But he did. Slowly, his gaze lifted, landing on her trembling hands. Something in his expression shifted, something subtle but unmistakably human. Adana stared at the floor, fighting the instinct to apologize for simply existing in his space. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a breath. "Please, just do it fast." She meant the reprimand, the correction, the sharp words she had grown accustomed to. It was easier to endure them quickly than to fear them. But Daniel didn't speak. Instead, he rose from his chair, walked toward her, and did something she never could have predicted in 1,000 lifetimes. He took off his jacket, not to scold her, not to intimidate her, but to place it gently over her shoulders, as though she were someone deserving of warmth. The gesture was small, simple, almost fragile, but it shattered everything she thought she knew about him. The air between them changed, no longer cold or heavy, but strangely alive, charged with emotion neither of them dared name. And in that quiet moment, beneath the whisper of rain, something began. The air in the study felt strangely still after Daniel placed his jacket over Adana's shoulders, as if the room itself paused to understand what had just happened. Kindness wasn't something Adana received often, especially not in this mansion where hierarchy ruled every hallway and silence was the only shield she had. She stood frozen, her fingers brushing the soft fabric, unable to reconcile the man before her with the stories whispered among the staff. Daniel didn't return to his chair. Instead, he remained near her, studying her with an expression she could not read. It wasn't pity. It wasn't authority. It was something gentler, something he seemed almost afraid to show. For a moment, the billionaire mask slipped, revealing edges softened by exhaustion and something deeper, something like regret. "You shouldn't be working this late," he said quietly. His voice had none of the sharpness she expected. It draped over her like a warm blanket, unsettling in its unfamiliar tenderness. Adana kept her eyes lowered, afraid that meeting his gaze might expose the storm inside her chest. She had spent years building invisible walls around her emotions. One unexpected gesture, and suddenly those walls felt thin. "I still have rooms to finish," she murmured. "They said I should handle them before dawn." Daniel frowned, a crease forming between his brows. He looked toward the hallway, as if he could see every unfair task she'd been given, every whispered command disguised as order, every burden placed on her simply because she never complained. His jaw tightened with a controlled kind of anger, not at her, but at the silent cruelty he had allowed to grow under his own roof. "I've noticed," he said, and the admission startled her. "You take on everything. Things you shouldn't have to." Adana's breath trembled. No one noticed. No one paid attention to whether she was drowning or surviving. She was simply expected to be there, obedient, invisible, tireless. "I just do what's asked of me," she replied, unsure what else to say. It was the truth, but also hid the truth. She worked because she had no choice, because survival demanded it. Daniel nodded slowly, as though her words confirmed something he'd been avoiding for far too long. He stepped away from the desk, pacing the room with a restless energy she had never seen in him. When he finally spoke again, his voice held a quiet confession. "I've been so focused on business, on building everything out there," he gestured vaguely toward the world beyond the mansion walls, "that I didn't see what was happening inside my own home." Adana looked up then, truly looked at him. The exhaustion around his eyes wasn't from work alone. There was a kind of loneliness there, the kind that well couldn't cure. "I'm sorry," he said softly. The word stunned her. A billionaire apologizing to a maid. It was unthinkable. Yet here he was, his sincerity unmistakable, reshaping everything she believed about him. The rain outside softened, the storm easing as if acknowledging the unexpected peace growing between them. For the first time, Adana felt seen, not as a worker, not as a servant, but as a human being. And it was Daniel's unexpected kindness that opened the door. For a long moment, the room held a silence that felt alive. Not the awkward kind, but the kind that follows a truth finally spoken. Adana stood still, Daniel's jacket warm around her shoulders, unsure whether she should leave or stay. She had never been invited to linger anywhere in this mansion. She was always meant to move, to serve, to disappear. But tonight felt different, as if the rules had quietly rewritten themselves. Daniel gestured gently toward a chair near the window. "Sit for a moment," he said. His tone wasn't commanding. It was almost shy, as though he feared she might refuse. Adana hesitated, her heart fluttering with uncertainty. But exhaustion weighed heavily on her legs, and a small part of her, a part she rarely listened to, longed for just a moment of rest. She lowered herself into the chair, her back straight, her hands folded nervously in her lap. Daniel took the seat across from her, not behind his imposing desk like a man hiding behind power. Up close, he looked more human than she had ever seen him. Tired, worn, flawed, real. He studied her for a moment, then spoke with a gentleness she didn't expect. "You always agree to the hardest tasks," he said, his voice low. "Why?" The question settled over her like dust. She wasn't used to being asked why she worked the way she did. People only cared that she got things done, not the reason behind her quiet obedience. She looked down at her hands, at the faint scars and lines that told stories she never voiced. "I don't have much choice," she finally said. "I have to send money home. My family, they depend on me. I can't complain. I can't risk losing this job." Daniel's expression softened, but he didn't interrupt. Encouraged, she continued, her voice trembling as she revealed pieces of life she usually kept locked away. "I had dreams once," she admitted, "but life, it pushed me in another direction. So now I just work. Every day. I do what I'm told, even when it hurts." Her words cracked something open inside her and inside him. Daniel leaned back, exhaling a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. "I understand more than you think," he said quietly. "People look at me and only see success. They don't see where I came from. They don't see the nights I went hungry or the people I lost along the way. I climbed so fast I didn't notice who I became at the top." Adana looked up, meeting his eyes for the first time. What she saw wasn't arrogance. It was remorse. "My father worked 3 jobs," Daniel continued. I watched him break himself so I could have a future. And when I finally made it, I left the struggle behind so completely that I forgot what it felt like. His voice cracked slightly. Hearing you speak, it reminded me. Their stories hung between them, different yet painfully similar. In that quiet study, the Maid and the billionaire found common ground built not on status, but on scars. And the moment their truths touched, something in both of them began to heal. The storm outside had quieted to a distant murmur, but inside the mansion, something far louder stirred, an unspoken shift that neither Adana nor Daniel fully understood. Their shared confessions lingered in the air like warm breath on glass, fragile and undeniable. Daniel rose from his seat slowly, as if compelled by an instinct he hadn't followed in years. "Come with me," he said gently. Adana blinked, uncertain whether she had heard him correctly. No employer had ever asked her to follow them anywhere except to point out a mistake. But Daniel's expression held no reprimand, only a quiet purpose. She stood, her heartbeat quickening as she trailed behind him through the dim corridor. They walked past familiar hallways, past portraits she dusted daily, but never truly saw. The mansion seemed different tonight, less like a labyrinth of marble and order, and more like a shell of a life Daniel had long outgrown. His footsteps were steady but tinged with hesitation, as if he hadn't walked this path in years. At the end of the corridor, they stopped before a door she had always assumed was locked. It was older than the others, made of rich oak and framed with a softness untouched by the modern renovations around it. Daniel rested his hand on the handle, pausing for a moment. "No one uses this room anymore," he murmured, almost to himself. He pushed the door open. What waited inside stole Adana's breath. The room felt nothing like the cold elegance of the mansion. It was warm, inviting, almost tender. Sun-kissed curtains framed a wide window, books filled wooden shelves, and a soft sofa sat beneath a knitted throw blanket. Everything inside felt preserved, untouched by time, untouched by grief. Daniel stepped inside first, his shoulders lifting and falling with a quiet sigh. "This was my mother's room whenever she visited," he said, his voice wrapped in memory. She loved soft spaces, places that felt like rest. Adana entered slowly, her fingertips brushing the edge of a small table adorned with a single porcelain vase. There was something sacred about the room, something carefully held together by love and loss. She felt like she was walking into Daniel's past, into a world he rarely let anyone see. "I haven't opened this room in years," he admitted. "But when you spoke earlier, I remembered how she used to say that everyone needs a corner of the world where they can simply breathe." Adana swallowed hard, her eyes glistening. "It's beautiful," she whispered. He turned to her, his gaze soft. "You deserve a place like this, Adana, even if it's only for a few minutes. You work harder than anyone here, and you shouldn't have to carry everything alone." The sincerity in his words struck her deeply. She had been strong for so long, too long, and standing in that room, a sanctuary she never expected to step foot in, her heart finally cracked open. Tears gathered at the corners of her eyes, slipping free before she could stop them. She tried to speak, but emotion stole her voice. Daniel didn't move toward her, didn't reach out. He simply stood nearby, offering something far greater than touch, understanding. And in the shelter of that hidden room, the walls around both their hearts quietly began to fall. The storm outside returned with sudden intensity, thunder rolling across the mansion like a distant drum. Inside the hidden room, the warmth from the soft lamps and the comforting glow of memory contrasted sharply with the chaos beyond the walls. Adana and Daniel remained seated, not moving, as though the tempest outside mirrored the storm of emotions swirling between them. Adana's hands rested in her lap, trembling slightly. She wanted to speak, to break the silence, but words seemed fragile against the weight of what had already passed between them. Daniel, too, seemed hesitant, as if exposing himself further would shatter the delicate equilibrium they had created. Yet the truth pressed for release, and he finally leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "I've been haunted," he admitted quietly, his voice almost lost beneath the rhythm of rain against the windows. "Haunted by the sense that I lost my humanity somewhere along the way. I built everything, yet I've been blind to the smallest, most important things." His gaze flicked toward her, catching the faint glint of tears in her eyes. "Watching you work quietly, tirelessly, reminded me of what I left behind. The care, the patience, the small acts that make a life more than a ledger or a business." Daniel nodded, almost painfully aware of the truth in her statement. "That's exactly it," he murmured. "I've been so focused on success, on building empires, that I forgot the miracle of small moments, the human moments. And tonight, seeing you, hearing you, I remembered what it feels like to care for someone without expectation, without ambition." His gaze softened, vulnerability threading through his usual composure. "I lost touch with that part of myself. Until now." For a long while, they sat in silence, letting the storm outside echo the raw honesty that filled the room. Neither spoke, yet both were fully heard. In that quiet communion, the walls that kept them apart, distance, wealth, unspoken fears, began to dissolve. The bond forming between them was fragile but undeniable, a bridge forged from shared recognition of struggle and the quiet courage to reveal their vulnerabilities. The rain began to soften, the storm easing as if acknowledging the emotional tempest that had raged inside. Adana's hands unclenched, and she let herself breathe fully for the first time that night. Daniel's shoulders relaxed, the heaviness in his chest lightened by truth and acknowledgement. In the space between thunder and silence, a profound understanding settled, a connection neither could ignore, born from honesty, empathy, and the unexpected power of kindness. The storm had finally passed, leaving behind a calm that felt almost unreal. The mansion seemed different now, quieter, as though it too had absorbed the weight of the night and sighed in relief. Daniel walked alongside Adana, leading her back toward the study. Each step felt deliberate, a gentle acknowledgement that this night had changed everything. For the first time, she noticed a subtle warmth in his presence, the absence of the cold authority that had defined him for so long. When they reached the doorway of the study, Daniel stopped. He looked at her fully, his eyes steady and sincere, the kind of look that demanded attention without demanding fear. "From tomorrow," he said softly, "your workload will be lighter, your pay higher, and your position will reflect the value you bring every single day." Adana blinked, unable to speak at first. Words failed her, not because she didn't understand, but because no one had ever offered her such recognition. No one had ever fought for her, cared for her, or seen her beyond the role she had been assigned in life. She felt the weight of exhaustion and disbelief mingle with something she had not allowed herself to feel for a long time. Hope. I don't know what to say," she finally whispered, her voice trembling. She had practiced humility all her life, but this humility now felt misplaced, as if it had no power against the sincerity and generosity of the moment. "You don't have to say anything," Daniel replied. "Just know that you deserve dignity. Adana, I will make sure you have it." His words were simple, but they carried the weight of genuine commitment, a promise anchored in respect rather than obligation. The soft glow from the study lamps cast shadows around them, but the room felt lighter than ever. The tension of hierarchy, the fear of reprimand, the invisible walls built over years, all of it seemed to dissolve in the warmth of his honesty. Adana could feel her body relaxing, her chest unclenching for the first time in what felt like forever. Gratitude welled up inside her, and though she struggled to express it, the look they exchanged spoke volumes. Respect, relief, and a quiet acknowledgement of a bond that had formed in the unlikeliest of places. Neither spoke of romance, nor did they need to. The emotional truth between them was unmistakable, and it hung in the air like a fragile thread, connecting two very different lives. The night had given them something extraordinary: recognition, compassion, and the first taste of trust. A single act of kindness had begun to reshape their world, and both knew that life in the mansion would never be the same again. As Adana turned to leave the study, she felt a strange lightness in her step, a subtle courage blossoming within her. Daniel watched her go, his chest eased by the knowledge that he had taken the first step in making things right, not just for her, but for himself as well. The promise lingered, unspoken yet fully understood, a turning point neither would forget. Dawn arrived softly, casting a golden glow over the Hartford mansion. The world outside seemed untouched, serene, unaware of the transformations that had occurred within these walls during the night. Adana stepped out into the garden, the crisp morning air brushing her face, carrying with a sense of renewal she hadn't felt in years. Her steps felt lighter, freer, as if the weight of exhaustion and expectation had lifted, leaving room for possibility and hope. Daniel watched from the balcony above, leaning on the rail, silent but present. He had seen the shift in her, the subtle straightening of her shoulders, the spark in her eyes, the way she moved with quiet confidence now. It reminded him that change often begins not in grand gestures, but in the acknowledgement of another human being's worth. This simple act, the knight's kindness, the protective warmth of the jacket, the promise of respect, had done more than comfort. It had ignited a new path for both of them. Adana looked up and caught his gaze. For a moment, their eyes met, and a quiet understanding passed between them. No words were necessary. The night's events had spoken for themselves. What had begun as a simple plea, whispered in fear and fatigue, had blossomed into connection, empathy, and mutual recognition. Both knew that life in the mansion and in their hearts would never be the same. As she turned to continue her duties, a thought lingered in her mind, the lesson hidden in the simple gestures that had transformed her night. True change, she realized, does not always come from power or wealth, but from attention, respect, and the courage to act with kindness when it is least expected. Daniel had reminded her, and perhaps reminded himself, that seeing another person fully, acknowledging their struggles, honoring their effort, offering genuine compassion, can ripple far beyond the moment, reshaping lives in ways neither could anticipate. The mansion, bathed in morning light, felt like a world renewed. Adana carried with her the quiet confidence that she mattered, not just for her work, but for her humanity. Daniel, too, had learned that wealth cannot substitute empathy, and that the smallest act of kindness can hold the greatest power. And so, amid the soft hum of the waking city, both of them began anew, each step a reminder that compassion transforms not only the receiver, but the giver as well. The lesson was simple yet profound. In recognizing the value of another soul, we uncover the deepest truths about our own. The mansion, bathed in morning light, felt like a world renewed. Adana carried with her the quiet confidence that she mattered, not just for her work, but for her humanity. Daniel, too, had learned that wealth cannot substitute empathy, and that the smallest act of kindness can hold the greatest power. And so, amid the soft hum of the waking city, both of them began anew, each step a reminder that compassion transforms not only the receiver, but the giver as well. The lesson was simple yet profound. In recognizing the value of another soul, we uncover the deepest truths about our own. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to share and subscribe. Your support helps us bring more inspiring stories to life, and together we can spread kindness one story at a time.